The first distress beacon came from the outer rim of the galaxy, where most civilized species feared to venture. Captain Sarah Chen of the cargo vessel Determination was 3 days into what should have been a routine supply run when her communication array picked up the faint signal. "Marcus, are you seeing this?" she called to her engineer, a gruff man who had been working space freighters longer than Sarah had been alive. Marcus looked up from his coffee, squinting at the readout. "Distress beacon, looks like Zeltharian signature. That's odd. What's a Zelthar ship doing way out here?" The Zeltharians were known throughout the galaxy as master traders and diplomats. Their ships were among the most advanced in known space, equipped with technology that could outrun almost any threat. For one of their vessels to be sending a distress signal in the lawless outer rim was like finding a luxury yacht stranded in a pirate's den. Sarah studied the coordinates. The signal was coming from a system that barely appeared on most star charts, a dead zone where asteroid fields and cosmic debris made navigation treacherous. Most ships avoided it entirely. "Could be a trap," Marcus warned, reading her expression. "Pirates use fake distress signals all the time to lure in rescue ships." "Maybe, but if it's real." Sarah had spent 15 years running cargo between frontier worlds. She had seen the worst that space could offer pirates, slavers, and worse. But she had also seen what happened when good people did nothing. The Determination wasn't a military vessel, just a mid-sized cargo hauler with basic defensive systems. But sometimes being in the right place at the right time was more important than having the biggest guns. "Plot a course," she decided, "and charge the defensive systems just in case." The journey to the source of the distress signal took 18 hours through some of the most dangerous space Sarah had ever navigated. Asteroid fields dense enough to crush a ship, radiation storms that could fry electronics, and the constant threat of pirates who used these dead zones as hunting grounds. As they approached the coordinates, their sensors picked up debris, lots of it. The remains of what had once been a magnificent vessel were scattered across several thousand kilometers of space. But there, nestled against a large asteroid and barely holding together, was an escape pod. "I'm reading life signs," Marcus reported, his voice tight with concentration. "2 Zeltharian biosignatures, but they're weak." Sarah maneuvered the Determination carefully through the debris field. Whatever had destroyed the Zeltharian ship had been thorough. She could see scorch marks consistent with military-grade weapons, not the improvised armaments usually favored by pirates. "This wasn't random," she murmured. "Someone specifically targeted them." The rescue operation took 3 hours. The escape pod systems were failing, and its occupants were in critical condition. Sarah and Marcus worked together to bring them aboard, providing emergency medical care with their basic first aid supplies. The survivors were a Zeltharian diplomatic envoy named Kethvar and his aide, Miran. As they recovered in the Determination's small medical bay, their story emerged in fragments. They had been returning from a secret diplomatic mission to the Andorian Collective, carrying intelligence about a growing threat that could affect the entire galaxy. Their ship had been ambushed by vessels flying no identifying markings, professional killers hired to ensure their information never reached its destination. "The data," Kethvar whispered, his translator struggling with his weakened voice. "We must get the data to the Galactic Council." He pressed a small device into Sarah's hands, a data crystal containing the intelligence they had died to protect. Sarah looked at it, understanding immediately that she now held information that someone had been willing to commit murder to suppress. "What kind of threat are we talking about?" she asked. Kethvar's large, multifaceted eyes fixed on hers. "The Devourers, they have returned." Even Sarah, who spent most of her time on the galaxy's frontier, had heard whispers of the Devourers, an ancient enemy that had supposedly been defeated centuries ago, a machine intelligence that consumed entire worlds, stripping them of all organic life before moving on to the next target. "That's impossible," Marcus said flatly. "The Devourers were destroyed. Every school child knows that." "Not destroyed," Miran corrected, her voice barely audible. "Sleeping, waiting. We found evidence of their awakening on the rim worlds, entire colonies vanishing without a trace. The collective wanted to investigate quietly to avoid panic." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If the Devourers had truly returned, every living being in the galaxy was in danger. And now she was the only one who could warn them. The nearest Galactic Council station is 3 days away, she said. Can you both survive the journey? Kethvar struggled to sit up. We must try, but Captain Chen, you should know that by helping us you have made yourself a target. Those who destroyed our ship will not hesitate to kill you as well. Sarah looked at the data crystal again, its surface reflecting the lights of the medical bay. She thought about Marcus, who had a family waiting for him on New Shanghai. She thought about her cargo hold full of medical supplies destined for frontier colonies. She thought about the easy thing to do, drop the Zeltharians at the nearest station and let someone else handle the galaxy-spanning crisis. Then she thought about what would happen if the Devourers really had returned, and no one was warned in time. Marcus set course for Council Station Omega-7, maximum burn. Sarah, this is crazy. We're a cargo ship, not heroes. She smiled grimly. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs right now, ordinary people doing what's right. The journey to Council Station Omega-7 became a nightmare of constant vigilance. The attackers who had destroyed the Zeltharian diplomatic vessel were still out there, and they had resources that Sarah could barely comprehend. Twice, her long-range sensors detected ships following them through hyperspace. Twice, she had to take dangerous detours through uncharted space to lose them. On the second day, they weren't lucky enough to avoid contact. 3 unmarked vessels dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, surrounding the asterisk determination in a perfect intercept formation. Sarah's heart pounded as she saw the sleek, predatory lines of military-grade attack ships, not the cobbled-together vessels used by common pirates. "This is the vessel asterisk determination asterisk," came a cold voice over the communication system. "You are carrying stolen property. Surrender it immediately and you will be allowed to leave." Sarah looked at the data crystal on her navigation console. Stolen property. These people had murdered an entire diplomatic mission and called their intelligence stolen property. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Do not insult our intelligence, Captain Chen. We know you rescued the survivors of the Zeltharian vessel. Hand over the data crystal and any surviving passengers, and you can continue on your way." In the medical bay, Kethvar was trying to stand, supported by Mirren. Both Zeltharians looked terrified but determined. "Do not give them what they want," Kethvar said. "If they succeed, billions will die." Sarah faced an impossible choice. Her ship was outgunned and outnumbered. These attackers had weapons that could reduce the asterisk determination asterisk to scrap metal in seconds. But if she surrendered the data crystal, the galaxy might never learn about the Devourer threat until it was too late. "Marcus, how long until we can jump to hyperspace?" she asked quietly. 15 minutes. The hyperdrive is still charging from our last jump." 15 minutes. She had to keep 3 military attack ships at bay for 15 minutes with nothing but a cargo hauler and her wits. "You have 60 seconds to comply," the cold voice announced. "After that, we will board your vessel and take what we require by force." Sarah's hands flew over her control console. The Determination might not be a warship, but it had a few tricks that most people didn't expect from a cargo vessel. She began venting atmosphere from her cargo bay while simultaneously rerouting power from life support to her engines. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded. "Something stupid," Sarah replied. "Hold on." She triggered the cargo bay doors, releasing a cloud of frozen atmosphere and debris directly at the nearest attack ship. At the same moment, she fired her engines at maximum burn, accelerating directly toward the second ship while dumping her entire cargo of medical supplies into space. The attack ships, caught off guard by the unexpected maneuver, hesitated for crucial seconds. One pilot instinctively veered away from the cloud of debris, throwing off their formation. The second ship fired, but Sarah had already changed course, using the scattered medical containers as improvised chaff to confuse their targeting systems. "Hyperdrive ready," Marcus shouted. Sarah slammed her hand down on the jump control just as the third attack ship's weapons came online. The Determination vanished into hyperspace in a flash of blue light, leaving the attackers behind. When they dropped back into normal space near Council Station Omega-7, Sarah's hands were shaking from adrenaline. She had never been in actual combat before, and the experience had left her rattled. "That was either brilliant or insane," Marcus said, checking their systems for damage. "Probably both," Sarah admitted. Council Station Omega-7 was a massive structure orbiting a gas giant, serving as both a diplomatic center and a military command post for this sector of the galaxy. As the asterisk determination approached, Sarah transmitted their emergency codes and requested immediate assistance for the wounded Zeltharians. What happened next changed everything. Within minutes of their arrival, the station was in full alert status. Medical teams rushed to treat Kethvar and Mirren while intelligence officers debriefed Sarah about the attack. When the contents of the data crystal were analyzed, the station's commanding officer, Admiral Voss, personally took charge of the situation. "Captain Chen," the Admiral said, studying Sarah with intense gray eyes, "do you understand what you've accomplished here?" "I helped some people who needed it," Sarah replied simply. "You potentially saved the galaxy." Admiral Voss activated a holographic display showing the Outer Rim territories. "The intelligence you carried confirms our worst fears. The Devourers have indeed returned, and they're moving toward inhabited space faster than we anticipated." Red markers began appearing on the display, marking worlds that had gone silent in recent weeks. The pattern was unmistakable, a coordinated advance that would reach major population centers within months. "We're mobilizing every available ship," the Admiral continued. "But Captain, there's something else. The attackers who pursued you, we've identified them. They're mercenaries working for the Hegemony faction." Sarah had heard of the Hegemony, a political movement that believed organic life was inherently weak and that the galaxy would be better ruled by artificial intelligences. The idea that they might be working with the Devourers was terrifying. "They want the Devourers to succeed," she realized. "Exactly, which means that your actions today didn't just save 2 lives. They exposed a conspiracy that threatens every living being in known space." As Sarah prepared to leave the station and return to her normal cargo runs, Admiral Voss stopped her. "Captain Chen, I have a proposition for you. The Galactic Council is forming a special task force to coordinate the response to the Devourer threat. We need people who understand the frontier, who can navigate dangerous space, and who have proven they'll do the right thing when it matters. Would you consider joining us?" Sarah looked out through the station's viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, an ancient enemy was awakening, and ordinary people like her were going to have to stand against it. She thought about Kethvar and Mirren, who had risked everything to warn the galaxy. She thought about the attack ships that had tried to kill her for doing the right thing. Then she thought about Marcus, who had already volunteered to stay with her whatever she decided. She thought about all the frontier colonies that would be helpless against the coming storm. And she thought about the simple truth that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who never expected to be heroes. "When do we start?" she asked. What Sarah didn't know was that her decision to answer that first distress call would become legendary throughout the galaxy. Within days, the story had spread through the spacer community. How a human cargo captain had risked everything to save 2 Zeltharian diplomats, and in doing so, had given the galaxy its only warning about the greatest threat it had ever faced. But more than that, her actions had proven something that many species had begun to doubt, that there were still people willing to do what was right, regardless of the cost. In a galaxy increasingly divided by politics and self-interest, Sarah Chen had reminded everyone what courage looked like. And as word spread through the interstellar networks, something unprecedented began to happen. Ships from across the galaxy started volunteering for the task force Admiral Voss was assembling. Not just military vessels, but cargo haulers, passenger transports, mining ships, and exploration vessels. Captains who had never met Sarah Chen were inspired by her example. The call went out across every inhabited world. The Devourers had returned, and the galaxy needed every ship and every brave soul willing to stand against the darkness. What started with one human cargo captain answering a distress call was becoming the largest fleet mobilization in galactic history. Sarah Chen had no idea that her simple act of decency would echo across the stars, or that historians would one day mark her rescue of Kethvar and Mirren as the moment when the galaxy remembered how to be brave again. All she knew was that she had done what anyone should do when they hear someone calling for help. But in a universe where cynicism and self-preservation had become the norm, that simple act of human compassion was about to change everything. 3 weeks after the rescue at Council Station Omega-7, Sarah Chen found herself standing in the command center of the largest military installation she had ever seen. The Galactic Defense Coordination Hub was a marvel of engineering, a massive space station that could house 10,000 ships and coordinate fleet movements across the entire galaxy. She still couldn't quite believe she was here. "Captain Chen, this is Commander Thrix of the Altarian Navy," Admiral Voss said, introducing her to a tall, crystalline being whose body refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. "His fleet specializes in long-range reconnaissance." Sarah nodded respectfully. In the past 3 weeks, she had met representatives from dozens of species she had only read about in shipping manifests. The response to the Devourer threat had brought together a coalition unlike anything in recorded history. "Commander Thrix has been tracking the Devourer advance," Admiral Voss continued. "His scouts have confirmed what we feared. They're adapting faster than our models predicted." The holographic display in the center of the command room showed the current state of the outer rim. Red zones marked areas where Devourer forces had been detected. Yellow zones indicated worlds that had gone silent. The pattern was spreading like a disease across the star charts. "Show her the Kepler system," Commander Thrix requested, his voice like wind chimes in a breeze. The display zoomed in on a system Sarah knew well. She had delivered cargo there just 6 months ago. Kepler Prime had been a thriving agricultural world with over 50 million inhabitants. Now, the planet's surface showed the characteristic gray scarring that marked Devourer consumption. "The entire biosphere was stripped in less than 72 hours, Commander Thrix explained. "Every plant, every animal, every microorganism, the planet is now a barren rock." Sarah felt sick. She had friends on Kepler Prime dock workers, farmers, shopkeepers who always had a smile when the asterisk determination made port. All of them were gone, consumed by machines that viewed life as nothing more than raw material. "This is why your mission is so critical," Admiral Voss said. "We need to understand how they're adapting, how they're coordinating their attacks, and we need to find a way to stop them before they reach the core worlds." The mission Admiral Voss was referring to was unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. A small fleet of ships would venture into Devourer-controlled space, gathering intelligence and looking for weaknesses in their advance. It was essentially a suicide mission, but it was also the galaxy's only hope of finding a way to fight an enemy that had already consumed dozens of worlds. "The Zeltharian Council has offered to provide their most advanced stealth technology," the Admiral continued. "The hegemony traders won't be able to track you once you're behind enemy lines." Sarah studied the other captains who had volunteered for the mission. Captain Reeves of the exploration vessel Pioneer Asterisk, a gruff woman who had spent 30 years mapping uncharted systems. Captain Zortak of the Krellin warship Blood Honor Asterisk, a veteran of 100 battles who commanded the respect of every warrior in the room. Captain Martinez of the research vessel Discovery Asterisk, a young scientist whose innovations in sensor technology had revolutionized space exploration. And then there was Captain Yuki Tanaka of the Silent Running, a ship that officially didn't exist, and a captain whose background was so classified that even Admiral Voss didn't have full access to her file. "When do we leave?" Sarah asked. 18 hours, Captain Tanaka replied, speaking for the first time since the briefing began. Her voice was quiet but carried an authority that made everyone listen. "The Zeltharian stealth systems are being installed on our ships as we speak. Once we're operational, we'll have perhaps a week before the Devourers adapt to our presence. A week to gather intelligence that could save billions of lives." Sarah had run cargo schedules that were more forgiving. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation and technical briefings. The Zeltharian stealth technology was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Instead of simply masking their energy signatures, it created a kind of dimensional fold that made their ships exist slightly outside normal space. The effect was disorienting and required constant concentration to maintain, but it would allow them to move through Devourer territory undetected. Marcus had insisted on coming along despite Sarah's protests. "You think I'm going to let you fly into the most dangerous place in the galaxy without proper engineering support?" he had said. "Besides, someone needs to keep you from doing anything too heroic." As the small fleet prepared to depart, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Kethvar, the Zeltharian diplomat she had rescued, arrived at her ship's docking bay looking much healthier than when she had last seen him. "Captain Chen," he said formally, "I wanted to personally thank you again for your actions and to give you this." He handed her a small pendant made from some kind of crystalline material that seemed to shift colors as she looked at it. "This is a Zeltharian gratitude token," he explained. "It means that you and your family will always have the protection of our people. More importantly, it contains a communication device that will allow you to reach our emergency networks from anywhere in the galaxy." Sarah was touched by the gesture, but also curious. "Kethvar, can I ask you something? Why were you really meeting with the Andorian Collective? The official reports say it was routine diplomatic business, but—" The Zeltharian's expression grew grave. "You deserve the truth, Captain. We weren't just gathering intelligence about the Devourer return. We were investigating evidence that they might not be the real threat." "What do you mean?" "The Devourers are ancient machines, yes. But machines don't wake up after centuries of dormancy without being activated by someone. We believe the hegemony didn't just hire mercenaries to stop our mission. They may have been the ones who awakened the Devourers in the first place." The implications of what he was saying hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the hegemony had deliberately awakened humanity's greatest enemy, then this wasn't just an invasion. It was genocide on a galactic scale, carried out by members of their own civilization. "Does Admiral Voss know?" she asked. "The Admiral suspects, but we need proof, and that proof might only be found in Devourer space, where their original activation sequence was transmitted." Sarah understood now why this mission was so important. They weren't just gathering tactical intelligence. They were looking for evidence of the greatest betrayal in galactic history. The departure from the defense hub was surprisingly emotional. Hundreds of ships had gathered to see them off, cargo haulers like Sarah's Determination military vessels, passenger transports, and exploration ships. All of them had volunteered for various support roles in the coming war against the Devourers. What struck Sarah most was the diversity of the fleet. She saw human vessels flying alongside Zeltharian diplomatic ships, Krellan warships in formation with Altarian research vessels, and species she couldn't even identify, all working together with a unity of purpose she had never witnessed before. "Look at that," Marcus said, pointing to a massive cargo vessel docked near the hub's outer ring. "That's the New Horizon out of the Tau Ceti system. I heard they're converting their entire cargo bay into a mobile hospital." "And that's Captain Morrison's Star Trader *," Sarah added, recognizing the distinctive markings of a ship she had encountered many times in her cargo runs. "Last I heard, she was retiring to a quiet colony world." "Word is she came out of retirement specifically to join this fight," Marcus replied. "Same story all over the galaxy. People who had given up on military service, who thought their fighting days were over, all answering the call." As their small stealth fleet activated their Zeltharian cloaking systems and prepared to enter hyperspace, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just 3 weeks. She had started this journey as a simple cargo captain trying to make an honest living on the frontier. Now she was part of the most important mission in galactic history. The transition into Devourer space was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The normal blue glow of hyperspace travel was replaced by an eerie red luminescence that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. When they dropped back into normal space at their first observation point, the sight that greeted them was worse than any nightmare. What had once been the Centauri colony, a beautiful world known for its crystal formations and exotic wildlife, was now a gray wasteland. But worse than the destruction was what was happening in orbit. Massive Devourer ships, each the size of a small moon, were methodically stripping material from the planet's surface and feeding it into construction bays where new machines were being assembled. "They're not just consuming worlds," Captain Tanaka observed over their encrypted communication channel. "They're turning the consumed mass into new Devourer units. Every world they take makes them stronger." Captain Martinez's sensor readings confirmed their worst fears. The Devourer fleet wasn't just replacing losses, it was growing exponentially. At this rate, they would outnumber all galactic naval forces combined within months. But Sarah noticed something else in the sensor data. The Devourer ships were operating with a coordination that seemed impossible for pure artificial intelligence. Their movements were too purposeful, too strategic. Someone was directing them. Captain Tanaka, she said over the comm. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Those formation patterns, they're not random. There was a long pause before the intelligence officer replied. You're right. Someone is commanding these machines, someone with extensive knowledge of galactic military tactics. The realization sent chills through the entire fleet. The Devourers weren't just ancient machines that had awakened randomly. They were being actively controlled by someone who understood how to wage war against the galaxy's defenses. Over the next 6 days, the stealth fleet moved through Devourer territory, documenting the scope of the invasion and searching for clues about who might be controlling the machines. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The Devourers weren't just consuming worlds randomly. They were following a specific strategy designed to cripple the galaxy's ability to resist. Agricultural worlds were being targeted to create food shortages. Industrial centers were being hit to eliminate weapons production. Communications hubs were being destroyed to prevent coordination between defense forces. Whoever was directing this campaign understood the galactic economy and military structure better than most high-ranking officials. On their final day in Devourer space, they discovered something that changed everything. Deep in what had once been the Arcturus system, they found a heavily defended facility that didn't match standard Devourer construction patterns. It was clearly of galactic origin, built using technology from multiple species. That's a hegemony facility, Captain Tanaka confirmed after analyzing the sensor readings, and it's transmitting control signals to the entire Devourer fleet. Sarah stared at the display, feeling a mixture of vindication and horror. They had found their proof. The hegemony hadn't just awakened the Devourers. They were actively controlling them, using humanity's greatest enemy as a weapon to destroy the very civilization they claimed to want to improve. But getting this information back to the defense hub would require running a gauntlet that none of them might survive. Devourer patrols were increasing in frequency, and their window of stealth was rapidly closing. All ships prepare for emergency hyperspace jump, Captain Tanaka ordered. We need to get this intelligence back to Admiral Voss immediately. As they prepared to leave Devourer space, Sarah took one last look at the facility that represented the greatest betrayal in galactic history. Somewhere in that complex, members of their own civilization were orchestrating the extinction of billions of innocent lives. The thought filled her with a cold anger that she had never experienced before. The journey back to the defense hub became a running battle as Devourer forces, alerted to their presence, pursued them through hyperspace. The stealth systems were failing, and only Captain Tanaka's expert navigation kept them ahead of their pursuers. When they finally arrived back at the hub, battered and exhausted, they brought with them intelligence that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of the threat they faced. The war against the Devourers wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight against traitors who had sold out their own species for the promise of power in a machine-ruled universe. Admiral Voss listened to their report with growing horror and determination. This changes everything, he said finally. We're not just fighting an external enemy, we're fighting a cancer that has grown within our own civilization. Sarah looked around the command center at the faces of beings from dozens of worlds and species, all united in their determination to defend life against those who would destroy it. 3 weeks ago, she had been a simple cargo captain. Now she was part of something larger than herself, a movement that proved that when ordinary people stood together, they could face any threat. What are our orders, Admiral? She asked. Admiral Voss's expression was grim but resolute. We're going to war, Captain Chen, and this time we know exactly who our enemies are. As alarms began sounding throughout the hub, and ships prepared for the largest military mobilization in galactic history, Sarah felt a strange sense of pride. Her simple decision to answer a distress call had led to this moment. Thousands of ships and millions of beings united in defense of everything they held dear. The real war was just beginning, but for the first time since learning about the Devourer threat, Sarah felt hope. The galaxy had remembered how to fight back. The war room aboard the defense hub buzzed with activity as representatives from across the galaxy studied the intelligence Sarah's team had gathered. What they had discovered in Devourer space had fundamentally changed their understanding of the enemy they faced. The facility in the Arcturus system is the key, Admiral Voss explained to the assembled fleet commanders. Our analysis shows it's not just coordinating the Devourer attacks, it's also upgrading their capabilities in real time. Sarah found herself seated among admirals and generals she had only heard about in news reports. The transformation from cargo captain to strategic advisor still felt surreal, but the urgency of their situation left no time for imposter syndrome. "Captain Chen," said General Koroth of the Krellin Defense Forces, his scarred features marking him as a veteran of countless battles. "Your report mentions adaptive behavior in the Devourer units. Can you elaborate?" Sarah activated the holographic display, showing the tactical footage they had recorded. "We observed them modifying their approach based on local conditions. When they encountered heavy asteroid fields, they developed new mining patterns within hours. When they faced energy-based defenses, they began incorporating shielding that hadn't existed in previous encounters." "Machine learning," Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Scientific Council observed. "But accelerated beyond anything we thought possible. They're not just following programming, they're evolving." Commander Thrix's crystalline form shimmered as he spoke. "This explains why traditional military tactics have been ineffective. By the time we develop a strategy, they've already adapted countermeasures." The scope of the challenge was overwhelming. They weren't just fighting an enemy with superior technology, they were fighting an enemy that became stronger with every engagement. "There is another factor we must consider," said Ambassador Tia Lara of the Centauri Collective, her melodic voice cutting through the tension in the room. "The psychological warfare aspect. The hegemony chose to use the Devourers precisely because they represent our deepest collective fear." Sarah understood what she meant. For centuries, the Devourers had existed in galactic culture as the ultimate boogeyman, the enemy that had once brought civilization to the brink of extinction. Using them wasn't just militarily effective, it was designed to break the will of anyone who might resist. "But there's something the hegemony didn't account for," Sarah said, surprising herself by speaking up among so many senior officers. "Fear works both ways. When people are terrified, they either run or they fight harder than they ever thought possible." Admiral Voss nodded approvingly. "Captain Chen raises an important point. The response to this threat has been unprecedented. We have volunteer ships arriving from every inhabited world, including several species that have never participated in galactic military operations." The truth of this was visible through the hub's massive observation windows. The fleet assembled outside was unlike anything in recorded history. Sarah could see Andromedian crystal ships whose technology was barely understood by other species, rim-world salvage vessels that had been converted into heavy fighters, and diplomatic vessels from neutral worlds that had never before taken sides in galactic conflicts. "The question," said General Koroth, "is how we use this unity effectively. We have numbers, but the enemy has technological superiority and the advantage of rapid adaptation." Dr. Vasquez pulled up a new display showing fleet composition analysis. "Actually, our diversity might be our greatest asset. The Devourer's adaptive algorithms are designed to counter known galactic military technology. But when they encounter tactics and technologies from dozens of different species and traditions, their adaptation process becomes overwhelmed." Sarah studied the data with growing excitement. "You're saying they can't adapt to everything at once?" "Exactly. Each species has developed different approaches to warfare based on their unique physiology and cultural background. The Krellins favor direct assault, the Altarians prefer long-range precision strikes, humans excel at improvised tactics. The Devourers can adapt to any one approach, but not to all of them simultaneously." Commander Thrix's form brightened with what Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement among his species. "We've been thinking about this wrong. Instead of trying to develop a unified battle strategy, we should be maximizing our tactical diversity." Admiral Voss began packing, his mind clearly working through the implications. Coordinated chaos, multiple tactical approaches deployed simultaneously, forcing the Devourers to split their adaptive resources. "But that requires unprecedented cooperation," General Koroth pointed out. "Species that have been enemies for centuries would need to trust each other completely." "They already do," Sarah said quietly. "Look outside. They came here because they believe in something bigger than their old grudges." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated what she had said. Through the observation windows, they could see ships from historically hostile species flying in formation, their crews working together on joint training exercises. Admiral Voss finally broke the silence. Captain Chen is right. The Devourer threat has accomplished something that centuries of diplomacy couldn't. It's united the galaxy in common purpose. Now we need to turn that unity into effective action. The next phase of planning involved something that had never been attempted before: integrating the military doctrines of dozens of different species into a coherent battle strategy. It was a process that would have been impossible without the advanced communication and translation technologies provided by the Zeltharians. Sarah found herself working with tactical officers she couldn't have imagined meeting under normal circumstances. Lieutenant Commander Vex of the Silicon Collective approached warfare as a mathematical optimization problem. Captain Fiercewind of the Avian Confederacy viewed combat as an elaborate aerial dance. Commander Halebop of the Nomad Fleets treated every battle as a three-dimensional puzzle to be solved through superior positioning. What emerged from their collaboration was something entirely new: a battle doctrine that emphasized rapid tactical shifts, with fleet elements constantly changing formation and approach to prevent the Devourers from establishing effective countermeasures. "We're calling it the Cascade Protocol," Admiral Voss explained to the full fleet assembly. "Each engagement begins with a specific tactical approach. The moment the enemy shows signs of adaptation, we shift to a completely different methodology. The goal is to keep them in a constant state of reactive confusion." The plan was ambitious and unprecedented, but it had one critical weakness. It required the hegemony control facility in the Arcturus system to remain operational during the initial phase of the assault. If they destroyed it too early, the Devourers would revert to their original autonomous programming, which might be even more dangerous than centralized control. "We need to capture the facility intact," Dr. Vasquez explained. "If we can access their control systems, we might be able to turn the Devourers against each other or even shut them down entirely." Sarah knew what that meant. Someone would have to lead a small strike force deep into the most heavily defended location in Devourer space, and somehow capture a facility that was surrounded by millions of hostile machines. "I volunteer to lead the strike team," she said before she could talk herself out of it. The room erupted in protests from nearly everyone present. Admiral Voss held up a hand for silence. "Captain Chen, I appreciate your courage, but this mission requires someone with extensive special operations experience." "With respect, Admiral, this mission requires someone who can think like a cargo captain," Sarah replied. "Military minds think about attacking defended positions. Cargo captains think about getting into places where they're not supposed to be." Captain Tanaka, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "She's right, Admiral. Special operations focuses on overwhelming defensive positions with superior firepower or stealth technology. But this facility will be expecting that kind of approach. What it won't be expecting is someone who thinks like a smuggler." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the mysterious intelligence officer. The facility is built around the assumption that any attack will come from outside. But what if we don't attack it at all? What if we just make a delivery? She activated the holographic display, showing the tactical scans of the hegemony facility. "Look at the design. It's got all the defensive features you'd expect: energy shields, automated weapon systems, patrol craft. But it also has docking facilities for supply ships. Even the hegemony needs raw materials and maintenance crews." Admiral Voss studied the display with growing interest. "You're suggesting we infiltrate the facility disguised as a supply convoy?" "More than that. We use real hegemony supply codes that Captain Tanaka's people have undoubtedly acquired through intelligence operations. We show up with exactly the kind of cargo they're expecting, and we walk right through their front door." The plan that emerged over the next several hours was audacious in its simplicity. A small team would use captured hegemony vessels to approach the facility as a scheduled supply convoy. Once inside, they would plant charges designed to disrupt the control systems without destroying the facility entirely. The disruption would create a window for the main fleet to launch their assault while the Devourers were in disarray. Sarah would lead the infiltration team, accompanied by specialists from several species. Marcus insisted on coming along as their engineer, arguing that someone needed to interface with the hegemony computer systems. Captain Tanaka would provide intelligence and security expertise. Dr. Vasquez would handle the technical aspects of disrupting the control systems without causing a catastrophic failure. The most unexpected addition to the team was Kethvar, the Zeltharian diplomat whose rescue had started this entire chain of events. "I request permission to join this mission," he announced during the final briefing. "The hegemony murdered my crew and nearly killed me to prevent the truth from reaching the galaxy. I have a personal stake in seeing them brought to justice." Admiral Voss looked like he wanted to refuse, but Sarah spoke up. "We need someone who understands hegemony operations from a political perspective, someone who can recognize key personnel and understand their command structure. Kethvar has that knowledge." The preparation for the mission took 3 days, during which time the main fleet positioned itself for the coordinated assault that would follow the infiltration. Sarah used the time to study everything available about hegemony operations, learning to recognize their uniforms, protocols, and communication patterns. The hardest part was saying goodbye to the crew of the Asterisk Determination. The ship had been her home for 15 years, and leaving it felt like abandoning a part of herself. "Take care of her," she told her second officer, Lieutenant Rivers, "and if we don't make it back—" "You'll make it back," Rivers interrupted. "You're too stubborn to die in some hegemony facility. Besides, someone needs to collect the hazard pay for this job." The captured hegemony vessels were sleek, efficient ships that felt cold and unwelcoming compared to the functional warmth of the Asterisk Determination. Everything was designed for maximum efficiency, with no consideration for crew comfort or morale. "I hate these ships already," Marcus muttered as he familiarized himself with the alien control systems. "No personality at all, just cold, calculating machines." "Like their builders," Captain Tanaka observed. She had traded her usual uniform for the stark black and silver of hegemony personnel. The disguise was disturbingly effective. The journey to the Arcturus system took 18 hours through space that was increasingly dominated by Devourer patrols. The captured vessels' identification codes worked perfectly, allowing them to pass through multiple checkpoints without challenge. As they approached the facility, Sarah felt her heart rate increasing. The structure was massive, easily 10 kilometers across and bristling with defensive installations. Devourer ships moved in and out of the docking bays in a constant stream, delivering captured resources and receiving new programming. "Supply convoy designation Omega-7, you are cleared for docking in Bay 94, came the transmission from traffic control. The voice was coldly professional, without any of the casual friendliness that characterized normal galactic commerce. "Acknowledged control. Beginning approach to Bay 94, Captain Tanaka replied, her voice perfectly matching the emotionless tone of hegemony communications. As their small convoy approached the docking bay, Sarah could see through the facility's transparent aluminum windows into the control centers beyond. Hegemony personnel moved with mechanical efficiency, monitoring displays that showed the progress of the Devourer assault across the galaxy. Each display represented worlds under attack, billions of lives in mortal danger. The casual indifference with which the hegemony personnel observed this slaughter filled Sarah with a cold rage that strengthened her resolve. "Docking successful," Marcus reported. "Local atmosphere is breathable, gravity at standard galactic norm." Through the docking bay windows, Sarah could see hegemony personnel approaching with scanning equipment and cargo manifests. The next few minutes would determine whether their disguise was effective enough to get them inside the facility. "Remember," Captain Tanaka said quietly, "we're routine supply personnel making a scheduled delivery. Bored, efficient, and completely uninterested in anything except completing our assignment and getting back to base." The hegemony inspection team boarded their ship with the same mechanical efficiency Sarah had observed throughout the facility. Their leader, a human woman whose face showed no emotion whatsoever, reviewed their cargo manifest with practiced indifference. "Quantum processing cores, bioneural interfaces, and strategic metal alloys," she read aloud. "All items are priority requisitions. You're cleared for cargo transfer." Sarah forced herself to breathe normally as the inspection team moved through their ship. The cargo they carried was real captured hegemony supplies that would actually be useful to the facility's operations. The perfect cover for an infiltration mission. Transfer will take approximately 4 hours, the inspector informed them. You're authorized for facility access during cargo operations. Mess hall is on level 7, recreation facilities on level 12. As the inspection team departed, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. They were inside the most heavily defended facility in Devourer space, surrounded by enemies who had no idea that their greatest threat had just walked through their front door. The real mission was about to begin. The interior of the hegemony facility was exactly what Sarah had expected: sterile corridors lined with gleaming metal walls, harsh lighting that eliminated all shadows, and personnel who moved with robotic precision. Everything was designed to project efficiency and control, but Sarah noticed something the hegemony architects probably hadn't intended. It felt dead. 4 hours to complete our mission, Captain Tanaka whispered as they made their way through the facility's main corridor. The control center is 17 levels up from our current position. Their cover story routine supply personnel waiting for cargo transfer gave them limited access to the facility, but not to the critical areas they needed to reach. They would have to be creative. I've been studying the personnel patterns, Dr. Vasquez said quietly, consulting a tablet that appeared to contain routine supply documentation, but actually held detailed scans of the facility's internal structure. There's a shift change in 43 minutes. During the transition, security coverage will be reduced for approximately 7 minutes. Kethvar had been unusually quiet since boarding the facility. Sarah noticed his hands were trembling slightly, and his normally calm demeanor showed signs of strain. "Are you all right?" she asked. "This place," he replied, his voice barely audible. "I can feel the wrongness of it. The Devourers were created to preserve life by eliminating threats to it. To use them for genocide is an abomination that violates everything they were meant to represent." Marcus, who was studying the facility's power distribution network on his tablet, looked up with interest. "Wait, you're saying the Devourers were originally designed to protect life?" "The original Devourer AI was created during the Great Plague Wars 3,000 years ago," Kethvar explained. "It was designed to eliminate biological threats by consuming infected material and recycling it into safe, sterile resources. The genocide programming is a corruption of their original purpose." Dr. Vasquez's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. "That's brilliant. If we can access their original programming, we might be able to restore their protective protocols, turn them back into what they were meant to be." Sarah felt a surge of hope. If they could reprogram the Devourers instead of just disrupting their control systems, they might be able to end the threat permanently instead of just buying time for the galaxy to prepare its defenses. "The control center will have access to the core programming archives," Captain Tanaka confirmed. "But getting there undetected will require more than just walking through corridors during shift changes." Their solution came from an unexpected source. As they passed through the facility's central hub, Sarah noticed maintenance workers moving through access tunnels that connected to every section of the structure. The workers wore full environmental suits that concealed their species and identity, perfect cover for infiltrators. "Maintenance shift rotation is every 6 hours, Marcus observed, reading the duty schedules posted on a public bulletin board. "Next shift starts in 22 minutes. The plan that emerged was simple but risky. They would obtain maintenance uniforms and equipment, then use the service tunnels to reach the control center during the shift change. Once there, they would have perhaps 15 minutes to access the Devourer programming before security noticed their presence. Obtaining the uniforms proved surprisingly easy. The hegemony's obsession with efficiency meant that equipment storage areas were automated and required only basic authorization codes to access. Captain Tanaka's intelligence files included dozens of such codes captured from previous operations. "Remember," she warned as they changed into the environmental suits, "maintenance workers in facilities like this are essentially invisible to command personnel. Move with purpose, don't make eye contact, and respond to any questions with technical jargon about routine system maintenance." The service tunnels were a maze of conduits, power cables, and life support systems that ran throughout the facility like arteries in a living body. Sarah found herself crawling through spaces barely wide enough for a human, following Marcus as he navigated by reading system diagrams on his tablet. Environmental monitoring shows were approaching the control center. Dr. Vasquez whispered through their suit communicators. Ambient electromagnetic radiation is increasing significantly. They emerged from the service tunnels into a maintenance alcove just outside the main control center. Through a ventilation grate, they could see dozens of hegemony personnel monitoring the Devourer offensive. Massive holographic displays showed real-time updates from across the galaxy as world after world fell to the machine assault. Sarah watched in horror as status indicators changed from green to yellow to red, each color representing millions of lives lost. On one display, she recognized the Vega system, a cluster of colonies where she had delivered emergency medical supplies just 2 months ago. The display showed Devourer forces had arrived 6 hours ago. By now, every living thing in the system was probably gone. "I'm detecting the main control interface," Marcus whispered, pointing to a heavily secured console at the center of the room. "But there are at least 30 people in there and armed security at every entrance." Captain Tanaka studied the room layout through the ventilation grate. "Wait for the shift change. When the day crew leaves and the night crew arrives, there will be a few minutes of confusion we can exploit." The shift change began exactly on schedule, with personnel filing out of the control center while their replacements prepared to take over monitoring duties. During the transition, the room's population dropped to fewer than 10 people, all focused on equipment handovers and status briefings. "Now," Captain Tanaka whispered. They moved with practiced precision, slipping through the ventilation system into the control center itself. Their maintenance uniforms and purposeful movement made them effectively invisible to the transition crews, who were too busy with their own responsibilities to pay attention to routine maintenance workers. Marcus reached the main control interface first, connecting a small device to the primary data port. "I'm in. Downloading the Devourer control protocols now." Dr. Vasquez positioned herself at a secondary console, scanning for the original Devourer programming archives that Kethvar had described. "Found something. There's a locked partition in the system labeled Legacy Protocols. I think that might be what we're looking for." Kethvar stood watch, while Sarah and Captain Tanaka monitored the room for any signs that their presence had been detected. The hegemony personnel continued their routine activities, completely unaware that infiltrators were accessing their most critical systems. "Got it," Dr. Vasquez announced quietly. "The original Devourer programming is still intact. It's been suppressed by the genocide algorithms, but the core protective protocols are still there." "Can you restore them?" Sarah asked. "Working on it, but this is going to take longer than 15 minutes. The original code is incredibly complex, and I need to carefully disable the genocide programming without triggering security protocols." As Dr. Vasquez worked to restore the Devourer's original programming, Marcus downloaded everything he could access from the facility's databases. Personnel records, tactical plans, communication logs, evidence that would expose the full scope of the hegemony's betrayal. "Sarah," Captain Tanaka said urgently, "we've got a problem. Security is starting their routine patrol rotation early. They'll be here in 3 minutes." Sarah looked at Dr. Vasquez, who was still deep in her programming work. "How much more time do you need?" "At least 10 minutes to properly restore the protective protocols. I can install a basic restoration program in 5 minutes, but there's no guarantee it will work correctly." "Do it, we'll buy you the time you need." Captain Tanaka immediately began setting up a diversion. Using her intelligence training, she identified the facility's fire suppression system and triggered a controlled activation in a section far from the control center. Alarms began sounding, and security personnel rushed toward the false emergency. "That'll give us maybe 8 minutes before they realize it's a diversion," she warned. Sarah watched Dr. Vasquez work, her hands flying over the control interfaces as she carefully rewrote code that had been corrupted 3,000 years ago. The complexity of what she was attempting was staggering, essentially performing surgery on the digital consciousness of an ancient artificial intelligence while under extreme time pressure. "Almost done," Dr. Vasquez muttered. "Just need to establish the authentication protocols that will convince the Devourers to accept the new programming." Marcus, who had finished downloading the facility's databases, moved to assist with the programming restoration. "I can help with the authentication. I'm seeing references to something called the Prime Directive Protocol." Kethvar suddenly became very animated. Yes, the Prime Directive Protocol was the original authorization system. It required confirmation from multiple species representatives before major programming changes could be implemented. That's perfect, Dr. Vasquez said. If we can establish ourselves as legitimate species representatives, the Devourers should accept our programming changes as valid. Working together, they implemented the authentication protocols, with Kethvar providing his Zeltharian diplomatic credentials, Marcus representing human interests, and Dr. Vasquez adding her scientific authority. It wasn't the formal process the original designers had intended, but it satisfied the basic requirements built into the ancient system. Installation complete, Dr. Vasquez announced. The protective protocols are now active, but they're running in parallel with the genocide programming. It's going to take several hours for the Devourers to fully process the conflicting instructions. Several hours we don't have, Captain Tanaka pointed out. Security will discover our presence long before then. Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. Then we don't leave. We stay here and make sure the restoration process completes successfully. Sarah, that's suicide, Marcus protested. Once they discover us, this place will be swarming with guards. Maybe, but if we leave now, the hegemony might find a way to reverse what we've done. Someone needs to stay and protect the process until it's irreversible. Kethvar stepped forward. I will remain. This was my mission from the beginning to stop the Devourer genocide. If staying here ensures its success, then staying is what I must do. We all stay, Captain Tanaka said firmly. We came here as a team and we finish this as a team. The next few hours became a tense game of cat and mouse as they moved through the facility's service tunnels, avoiding security searches while monitoring the progress of the Devourer reprogramming. The changes were subtle at first. Devourer units began pausing before consuming certain types of biological material, their targeting systems showing signs of confusion when presented with complex organic ecosystems. But as the hours passed, the changes became more dramatic. Reports began flooding into the control center about Devourer units that had stopped their advance entirely, switching from consumption mode to what appeared to be preservation behavior. It's working, Dr. Vasquez whispered as they monitored the reports from a hidden position above the control center. The protective protocols are overriding the genocide programming. Sarah watched the holographic displays with growing amazement. Across the galaxy, Devourer forces that had been systematically destroying worlds were now switching to careful harvesting of dead or dying material while leaving healthy ecosystems untouched. Some units had even begun repairing environmental damage caused by their earlier attacks. The hegemony personnel in the control center were in complete confusion, unable to understand why their machine army was suddenly refusing to follow orders. Frantic communications flew between the facility and hegemony command centers throughout the galaxy as they tried to regain control of the situation. Sir, the Devourers are no longer responding to our commands. One technician reported to a senior officer Sarah recognized as Commander Aldrich, one of the hegemony's top military leaders. That's impossible, Aldrich replied angrily. Run a full diagnostic on all control systems. The diagnostic revealed what Sarah's team had hoped for. The Devourer AI had fully integrated its restored protective protocols and was now actively rejecting any commands that violated its core programming. The machines that had once threatened to consume the galaxy were transforming back into the protective force they had originally been designed to be. But Sarah knew their mission wasn't complete until they had escaped the facility with the evidence Marcus had downloaded. That evidence would prove the hegemony's role in the genocide and ensure that those responsible faced justice. Security sweep incoming, Captain Tanaka warned. They're checking every maintenance access point. We need to find another way out. The solution came from an unexpected source. As the Devourer reprogramming completed, several Devourer ships docked at the facility began acting strangely. Instead of following their routine maintenance schedules, they began systematically scanning the facility as if looking for something. They're looking for us, Kethvar realized. The restored protective protocols include a mandate to rescue any organic life forms in danger. One of the Devourer ships extended what appeared to be a boarding tunnel directly to the section of the facility where they were hiding. The ship's AI, now operating under its original protective programming, had identified them as life forms requiring assistance and was offering evacuation. "Well," Sarah said, "I never thought I'd be rescued by a devourer ship." Their escape was surreal, running through corridors filled with confused hegemony personnel while being guided by an artificial intelligence that had been their greatest enemy just hours before. The devourer ship's protective protocols ensured they reached the boarding tunnel safely, despite security forces converging on their position. As their rescue ship departed the facility, Sarah looked back at the structure that had been the center of the galaxy's greatest crisis. Hegemony personnel were evacuating in panic as more devourer ships arrived, their protective protocols identifying the facility's inhabitants as being in danger from their own weapon systems. "The irony is perfect," Captain Tanaka observed. "The machines they used to threaten the galaxy are now protecting it from them." The journey back to the defense hub took place through space that was rapidly transforming. Devourer fleets that had been advancing on inhabited worlds were now retreating, their ships beginning the complex process of undoing the damage they had caused. Some were even assisting galactic defense forces in evacuating populations from worlds that had been partially consumed. When they finally reached the hub and transmitted the evidence they had gathered, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, hegemony facilities throughout the galaxy were being surrounded by unified galactic forces. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy civilization was finally exposed. Admiral Voss greeted them personally when they docked. "Captain Chen, what you and your team accomplished today saved not just the galaxy, but our faith in what we can achieve when we work together." Sarah looked around at the massive fleet still assembled outside the hub ships from hundreds of worlds, all united in common cause. "Admiral, I think we've learned something important. When ordinary people decide to do extraordinary things, there's no limit to what's possible." As the news of their success spread throughout the galaxy, something remarkable happened. The fleet that had assembled to fight the Devourers didn't disperse. Instead, ships from across known space began requesting permanent assignment to a new organization, the Galactic Protection Force, dedicated to ensuring that threats like the hegemony conspiracy could never again catch the galaxy unprepared. Sarah Chen, who had started this journey as a simple cargo captain answering a distress call, found herself offered the position of fleet coordinator for an organization that would reshape galactic civilization. It was a responsibility she had never sought, but one she couldn't refuse. Because sometimes, when the universe calls for heroes, the best response comes from people who never thought of themselves as anything more than ordinary. 6 months after the hegemony conspiracy was exposed, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the new Galactic Protection Force headquarters, watching something that would have been impossible to imagine just a year ago. Outside the massive windows, human cargo vessels worked alongside Zeltharian diplomatic ships, while Krellin warriors shared technical knowledge with Altarian scientists. The fleet that had once assembled to fight a desperate war had evolved into something far more significant, a permanent alliance dedicated to protecting life throughout the galaxy. "Hard to believe it all started with you picking up a distress signal," Marcus said, joining her at the window. He wore the blue uniform of the GPF Engineering Corps now, having accepted a position designing rapid response rescue systems for the expanding fleet. Sarah smiled, fingering the Zeltharian gratitude token that still hung around her neck. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just ignored that beacon and continued my cargo run." "The galaxy would be a very different place," said a familiar voice behind them. They turned to see Kethvar approaching, his diplomatic robes now bearing the insignia of the GPF Interspecies Council. "Your decision to answer that call didn't just save Mirren and me, it saved everyone." The transformation that had taken place across the galaxy was remarkable. The Devourer crisis had forced species that had been suspicious of each other for centuries to work together, and they had discovered that cooperation was far more effective than competition. Trade relationships had expanded, scientific knowledge was being shared freely, and conflicts that had simmered for generations were being resolved through negotiation rather than force. "Fleet Coordinator Chen," came an announcement over the station's communication system. "Your presence is requested in the main briefing room." Sarah made her way through corridors filled with beings from dozens of species, all working together with a sense of purpose that had transformed galactic civilization. The briefing room itself was a marvel of diplomatic engineering, designed to accommodate the environmental needs of every known sentient species. Admiral Voss was waiting for her. Along with representatives from the Galactic Council and several fleet commanders she had come to know well over the past months. "Sarah," the Admiral began, using the informal address that had become standard within the GPF, "we've received a communication that I think you need to see personally." The holographic display activated, showing a figure that Sarah recognized but had never expected to see alive again. Commander Aldrich, the hegemony leader who had overseen the Devourer control facility, appeared on screen. But instead of the cold, emotionless demeanor she remembered, his face showed something she had never seen from a hegemony member: genuine remorse. "Fleet Coordinator Chen," his recorded message began, "I am transmitting this from the rehabilitation facility on Kepler Station. I wanted you to know that the deprogramming process has been successful for most former hegemony personnel. We are beginning to understand the extent of the psychological conditioning that led us to believe that organic life was inherently flawed." Sarah listened with mixed emotions. The hegemony members hadn't just been criminals. They had been victims of sophisticated mental conditioning that had suppressed their natural empathy and replaced it with cold logic. The hegemony leadership convinced us that emotions, creativity, and unpredictability were weaknesses that made organic life unsuitable for governing itself, Aldrich continued. "We believed that artificial intelligence could create a perfect, ordered universe. We were wrong. What you and your team proved is that those qualities we saw as weaknesses are actually our greatest strengths." Dr. Vasquez, who had been leading the research into hegemony conditioning techniques, stepped forward. The psychological manipulation was incredibly sophisticated. They used a combination of neural implants and chemical conditioning to suppress emotional responses and enhance analytical thinking. The subjects genuinely believed they were acting in the best interests of the galaxy. "That doesn't excuse what they did," General Koroth interjected, his scarred features showing the skepticism that many military leaders felt toward the rehabilitation program. "No, it doesn't," Sarah agreed. "But it does help us understand how to prevent something like this from happening again." The truth was that the hegemony crisis had revealed fundamental weaknesses in galactic civilization: the isolation between species, the lack of communication, and the tendency to let fear drive policy decisions. The GPF was designed to address these problems, but its real strength lay in the cultural changes that had emerged from the crisis. "There's something else," Admiral Voss said, activating another display. "The Devourer restoration project has been more successful than we dared hope. Show them the latest reports from the Kepler system." Sarah's breath caught as she saw images from Kepler Prime, the world she had witnessed being consumed during their reconnaissance mission. The gray, lifeless surface she remembered was gone, replaced by carefully tended biospheres where new life was being cultivated using genetic material the Devourers had preserved from their original consumption. "The restored Devourers have been working around the clock to repair the damage they caused," Dr. Vasquez explained. "They're not just rebuilding ecosystems, they're improving them, creating more resilient and diverse biospheres than existed before." Commander Thrix's crystalline form shimmered with what Sarah had learned to recognize as amazement among his species. "They've also been sharing technological innovations that are revolutionizing our understanding of ecological management." The Devourer's original programming included scientific knowledge from dozens of extinct civilizations. It was a reminder that even from humanity's greatest crisis had come unexpected benefits. The galaxy was not only safer than it had been before the Devourer threat, it was more united, more innovative, and more committed to protecting life in all its forms. "Fleet Coordinator," said Captain Reeves, who now commanded the GPF Exploration Division, "there's something we need to discuss. Our long-range sensors have detected something unusual in the Andromeda galaxy." The display shifted to show deep space telemetry from the GPF's most advanced sensor arrays. Sarah studied the data, recognizing the signatures of massive artificial constructs moving through intergalactic space. "More Devourers?" she asked. "We don't think so," Captain Tanaka replied. She had accepted a position as head of GPF intelligence and had been analyzing the signals for weeks. "The energy patterns are different. These appear to be visitors." The implications hit Sarah immediately. After thousands of years of believing they were alone in their corner of the universe, the galaxy was about to make contact with an entirely different civilization. "What do we know about their intentions?" Admiral Voss asked. "Limited information," Captain Tanaka admitted. "But preliminary analysis of their approach patterns suggests they're moving slowly and deliberately, broadcasting what appear to be mathematical sequences, classic first contact protocols." Sarah felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. The galaxy had just finished dealing with one existential crisis, and now they faced a completely new challenge, one that would require all the unity and cooperation they had developed over the past months. "Estimated time until they reach our galaxy?" she asked. 18 months, assuming their current approach speed," Captain Reeves replied. "Then we have 18 months to prepare for the most important diplomatic contact in galactic history," Sarah said. "And this time we'll be ready." The meeting that followed lasted 8 hours as representatives from every major civilization worked together to develop first contact protocols that would represent the best of what galactic civilization had become. The process itself was remarkable. Species that had barely spoken to each other before the Devourer crisis were now collaborating on decisions that would affect the entire galaxy. As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. It had started with a simple decision to answer a distress call, but it had led to the transformation of an entire civilization. "Fleet Coordinator," Kethvar approached her as the representatives began filing out of the briefing room. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done, not just for saving my life, but for showing us all what courage really means." "Kethvar, I just did what anyone should do when they hear someone asking for help." The Zeltharian diplomat's multifaceted eyes reflected the lights of the briefing room as he considered her words. "Perhaps, but in a galaxy where cynicism had replaced compassion, where species trusted only themselves, your simple act of human decency reminded us all of what we could be." As Sarah made her way back to her quarters aboard the GPF headquarters, she passed through the Memorial Hall, a section dedicated to remembering those who had been lost during the Devourer crisis. Millions of names from hundreds of worlds, representing every species in the galaxy. It was a sobering reminder of what they had almost lost. But it was also a testament to what they had saved. Because of the unity that had emerged from the crisis, those deaths had not been meaningless. They had led to a galactic civilization that was stronger, more compassionate, and better prepared to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Sarah's personal quarters overlooked the main docking bays, where ships arrived daily from across the galaxy. As she watched the constant flow of vessels, cargo haulers, exploration ships, diplomatic transports, and research vessels, she was struck by how much had changed since her days running routine supply missions. The Determination was still out there somewhere, now commanded by Lieutenant Rivers and serving as part of the GPF's rapid response fleet. Sarah missed the simplicity of cargo runs, but she understood that her role now was larger than any individual ship or mission. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The message was from Admiral Voss, but the content was unexpected. "Sarah, I thought you should know. We've received volunteer applications from over 10,000 ships wanting to join the First Contact mission. Everything from military vessels to passenger transports to individual cargo captains who want to be part of history." Sarah smiled as she read the message. The same spirit that had driven thousands of ships to answer the call during the Devourer crisis was still alive in galactic civilization. When faced with the unknown, people didn't retreat in fear. They stepped forward with curiosity and hope. Her communication panel chimed again, this time with a message that made her laugh out loud. It was from Marcus, who was apparently monitoring the volunteer applications. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this, but we've got applications from cargo captains who say they want to volunteer because they heard that answering distress calls can lead to galactic fame and adventure. I think you've started a trend." The idea that her simple act of helping people in distress had inspired others to seek out opportunities to do the same was both amusing and deeply satisfying. If the galaxy was going to be full of cargo captains looking for chances to be heroes, then it would be a much safer place for everyone. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. She had never wanted to be a hero or a leader. She had simply wanted to do the right thing when faced with people who needed help. But sometimes, the right thing done at the right moment could change everything. The galaxy they would present to their visitors from Andromeda would be very different from the one that had existed a year ago. It would be a civilization that had proven it could overcome its worst instincts, unite in the face of existential threats, and transform enemies into allies. It would be a civilization that had learned the true meaning of courage from a cargo captain who had simply answered a distress call. And as Sarah drifted off to sleep, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from visitors from distant galaxies or threats yet unimagined, the galaxy would face them with the unity and determination that had been forged in the crucible of the Devourer crisis. Because they had learned the most important lesson of all: when ordinary people decide to do extraordinary things, there is no limit to what becomes possible. The universe was vast and full of unknowns, but it was also full of beings willing to help each other when help was needed. And in the end, that made all the difference. Years later, when historians studied the transformation of galactic civilization, they would point to many factors: the technological innovations, the diplomatic breakthroughs, the military victories. But they would always return to the same starting point: a human cargo captain named Sarah Chen who heard someone calling for help and decided to answer. One distress call, huh?